Rebecca thought she had everything figured out. At 34, her life looked like one of those pictures you'd see on social media that makes you think, wow, she's really got it all together. She had a good job at a marketing firm in Portland, a beautiful apartment downtown, and most importantly, she was surrounded by people she loved. Her fiancé, Tom, was the kind of guy everyone liked. Tall, charming, always knew what to say at parties. They'd been together for 3 years, and he'd proposed 6 months ago at her favorite restaurant. The ring was perfect. The proposal was perfect. Everything was falling into place exactly as it should. Then there was her best friend since college, Lisa. They'd met freshman year when they were randomly assigned as roommates, and somehow that accident had turned into 15 years of friendship. Lisa knew everything about her. Every breakup, every job interview, every midnight ice cream run when life got hard. She was going to be the maid of honor at the wedding. Rebecca's older sister, Claire, lived just 20 minutes away with her husband and 2 kids. Growing up, they'd fought like cats and dogs, but somewhere in their 20s, they'd become close. Claire was the practical one, the one who always had her life together, and Rebecca had always looked up to her for that. The wedding was set for September, just 4 months away. But before that, Rebecca wanted to do something special for everyone who mattered to her. She'd always loved the idea of those sunset cruises on the Willamette River, the ones where you could see the whole city lit up as the sky turned pink and orange. So she booked a private boat for an engagement celebration. Nothing too fancy, just close friends and family, good food, and a couple of hours on the water. The day arrived with perfect weather. Not too hot, not too cold, just that ideal Portland summer evening where everything feels possible. Rebecca spent an hour getting ready, changing her outfit 3 times before settling on a light blue dress that moved nicely in the breeze. She paired it with wedge heels, not too high, but enough to feel dressed up. Tom picked her up and they drove to the marina together. He held her hand the whole way, telling her how beautiful she looked, how excited he was. She felt grateful. This was her life. These were her people. What more could anyone want? At the dock, everyone was already gathering. Lisa showed up in a stunning red dress, immediately pulling Rebecca into a hug and gushing about how perfect the evening was going to be. Claire arrived with her husband, apologizing for being late because the kids' babysitter had shown up 15 minutes behind schedule. Tom's brother, Kevin, was already on the boat, helping the crew with something. He gave them a quick wave but didn't come over. Kevin was 2 years younger than Tom, and honestly, Rebecca had never quite known what to make of him. He was quiet, almost awkward at family gatherings. While Tom worked the room and had everyone laughing, Kevin usually stood in the corner nursing a beer, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was nice enough, always polite, but they'd never had a real conversation beyond small talk about the weather or traffic. The boat was beautiful. String lights hung across the deck, and there was a table set up with appetizers and champagne. As they pulled away from the dock, Rebecca stood at the railing with Tom, watching the city slowly drift by. The water was calm, reflecting the buildings and the sky. She felt his arm around her waist and thought, this is what happiness feels like. Lisa came up beside them with 3 glasses of champagne. A toast, she said, handing them each a glass. To the most beautiful couple I know. May your marriage be filled with as much love and laughter as you've already brought into all our lives. They clinked glasses, and Rebecca took a sip. The bubbles tickled her nose. Around them, everyone was mingling, laughing, enjoying themselves. Claire was chatting with Tom's parents. A few of their other friends were taking selfies against the backdrop of the city. Kevin was still off to the side, but now he was talking to one of the crew members about something. As the boat moved further down the river, the captain announced they were going to head under the bridge and then circle back. Rebecca walked along the railing, just taking it all in. The breeze felt good on her skin. The music was playing softly in the background. Tom was behind her somewhere, laughing at something his dad had said. She thought about the wedding, about how she'd walk down the aisle in a few months, and all these same people would be there watching. She thought about the life she and Tom would build together. Maybe they'd buy a house in the suburbs. Maybe they'd have kids in a year or 2. She could picture it all so clearly. Lisa appeared beside her again. Having fun? The best, Rebecca said, meaning it. Thank you for being here. For always being here. Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss this for anything, Lisa said, squeezing her hand. You're my person, you know that. Rebecca did know that. Or at least she thought she did. The boat was approaching a wider section of the river now. Another vessel, a bigger tour boat, was heading in the opposite direction. The captain adjusted their course slightly to give it room to pass. Rebecca watched it approach, full of tourists probably, all of them taking pictures of the skyline. As the larger boat passed, it created a wake. Nothing dramatic, just the normal waves that boats make. Their smaller vessel rocked gently. Most people didn't even notice, just adjusted their stance automatically. Rebecca was leaning against the railing, her champagne glass in one hand, completely relaxed. She wasn't paying attention to the movement of the boat. She was looking back toward the group, about to call Tom over to take a photo. Then the wake hit. It was bigger than expected, hitting them at just the wrong angle. The boat lurched suddenly to the side. Rebecca's body shifted, her center of gravity completely off. She felt herself falling forward, her hand reaching out for the railing but missing it. The champagne glass flew from her hand. For a split second she thought she'd catch herself. Then she realized she wasn't going to. She went over the railing. The last thing she heard was screaming. Lisa's voice, sharp and terrified. Claire shouting her name. Then the water. The cold hit her like a punch. It wasn't supposed to be that cold. It was summer. But rivers are always colder than you think. And the Willamette was no exception. The shock of it drove the air from her lungs. She went under, her dress and shoes immediately becoming weights dragging her down. She kicked hard, fighting her way back to the surface. Her head broke through and she gasped, sucking in air and water at the same time, choking. The boat was already several feet away. The current was stronger than she'd realized, pulling her along. She tried to swim toward the boat, but her dress was tangled around her legs. Her shoes felt like anchors. Panic was starting to set in. Real panic, the kind that makes your chest tight and your thoughts scatter. She could see faces at the railing. Tom was there, his mouth open, shouting something she couldn't hear over the rushing in her ears. Lisa was beside him, her hands over her face. Claire was pointing, yelling at someone. Rebecca went under again. She kicked harder this time, fought her way back up. She was getting tired already. The cold was seeping into her muscles, making everything harder. Where was the life preserver? Why wasn't anyone throwing her something? The boat was turning, she could see that, but it felt like slow motion. Everything felt like slow motion except the current, which was pulling her faster and faster. She thought, I'm going to drown. Right here, in front of everyone I love, wearing my favorite dress, I'm actually going to drown. Then something crashed into the water beside her. Someone was in the water with her. Through the panic and the cold and the water in her eyes, Rebecca saw a figure swimming toward her with strong, purposeful strokes. It was Kevin. Tom's younger brother, the quiet one who barely talked at family dinners, had jumped in after her. He reached her in seconds, his hand grabbing her arm firmly. I've got you, he said, his voice calm despite the situation. Just breathe. I've got you. Rebecca tried to say something but only managed to cough up more water. Her legs were still tangled in her dress and she was fighting to keep her head above the surface. Every instinct was screaming at her to grab onto Kevin and climb up him like a ladder. But somewhere in her panicked brain, she remembered that's the worst thing you can do to someone trying to save you. Turn on your back, Kevin said. His voice was steady. Like this was just another day, like they weren't both in a freezing river with a current pulling them downstream. Let me do the work. Just float. She tried to turn, but her dress fought her. Kevin's arm came around her chest from behind, supporting her weight. Stop kicking. Save your energy. I'm going to get us back to the boat, but you need to stay calm. The boat was turning finally, coming back around toward them. But it felt so far away. Rebecca could still see faces at the railing. Tom was there, his face white, one of the crew members beside him. Lisa was crying, her hands gripping the rail. Claire had her phone out, probably calling 911. Why isn't anyone else helping? Rebecca managed to choke out. They are helping, Kevin said, still swimming steadily with one arm while holding her with the other. The boat's coming. Just stay with me. The current was carrying them downstream, but Kevin was angling them toward the boat's path, trying to meet it rather than fight the water. Rebecca realized he knew what he was doing. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't flailing. He was actually thinking. Where'd you learn to swim like this? She asked, partly to stay conscious, partly because the fear was overwhelming and talking helped. Lifeguard in college, Kevin said. His breathing was heavy but controlled. 4 summers. Pulled out more drunk idiots than I can count. You're doing good. Keep breathing. Rebecca tried to focus on that, breathing in and out. Don't think about how cold the water is. Don't think about what could have happened if Kevin hadn't jumped. Don't think about why Tom hadn't jumped. The boat was getting closer now. The crew had thrown out a life ring attached to a rope, and they were pulling it toward Kevin and Rebecca. Kevin reached out and grabbed it, looping it under Rebecca's arms. They're going to pull you in, he said. Hold on to this. Don't let go. The rope went taut, and Rebecca felt herself being dragged through the water toward the boat. It seemed to take forever. Her fingers were numb. Her teeth were chattering so hard she thought they might crack. Then there were hands reaching down, grabbing her arms, hauling her up onto the deck. She collapsed onto the boards, coughing and shaking. Someone wrapped a blanket around her. Claire was beside her, crying, saying her name over and over. Tom was there too, kneeling beside her, his hands on her face. Baby, oh my God, are you okay? His voice cracked. I thought I lost you. Rebecca couldn't respond. She was shaking too hard, her body going through the shock of what had just happened. Behind Tom, she saw Kevin being pulled back onto the boat. He was soaking wet, his clothes plastered to his body. But he immediately looked over at her, checking that she was okay before accepting the blanket someone offered him. The captain was on the radio, talking to the Coast Guard or police or whoever you call when someone falls off a boat. They were heading back to the dock immediately. The celebration was over. Lisa was hovering nearby, her mascara running down her face. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry, I didn't know what to do. Claire was more practical, already on her phone calling their parents, telling them Rebecca was fine, but they needed to meet them at the hospital. The crew wanted her checked out. Make sure she didn't have hypothermia or water in her lungs. Tom stayed beside Rebecca, holding her hand, but she found herself looking past him at Kevin. He was sitting against the opposite railing, the blanket around his shoulders, his hair dripping water onto the deck. One of the crew members was talking to him, probably thanking him, but Kevin's eyes were on Rebecca like he was still making sure she was really okay. The ride back to the dock felt both eternal and instant. Rebecca's mind was spinning. She kept replaying the moment over and over. The railing, the fall, the water, the cold, the panic, and then Kevin appearing beside her like he'd been shot from a cannon. She'd seen Tom's face at the railing. He'd been frozen, completely frozen. His mouth open in shock, his hands gripping the rail but frozen. Lisa had been screaming but not moving. Claire had been on her phone. Tom's parents had been clutching each other. The crew had been scrambling for life preservers, but Kevin had jumped. He hadn't hesitated. Hadn't thought about it. Hadn't weighed the risks or waited to see what someone else would do. He'd just gone. At the dock, paramedics were waiting. They loaded Rebecca onto a stretcher despite her weak protests that she could walk. Tom climbed into the ambulance with her, still holding her hand, still telling her everything was going to be okay. Through the ambulance's back windows, Rebecca saw Kevin standing on the dock, still wrapped in the blanket, watching them drive away. Nobody else seemed to be paying attention to him. Everyone was focused on her, on the drama, on what had happened. But he'd been the one in the water. At the hospital, they checked her vital signs, took her temperature, listened to her lungs. Mild hypothermia, they said. Some water inhalation, but nothing serious. They wanted to keep her for observation for a few hours, but she was going to be fine. Tom never left her side. He kept apologizing, though she wasn't sure what for. I froze, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw you go over, and I froze. Rebecca squeezed his hand. It's okay, she said automatically. But even as she said it, something felt wrong about those words. Lisa and Claire arrived an hour later. Lisa had stopped crying, but her eyes were red and puffy. She hugged Rebecca carefully like she might break. I was so scared, Lisa said. I couldn't move. I just stood there screaming like an idiot. You called for help, Rebecca said. That's important too, but was it? The boat crew would have called for help. Claire had already been calling for help. What Rebecca had needed in that moment wasn't someone to call for help. She'd needed someone to actually help. She'd needed exactly what Kevin had done. Where is Kevin? Rebecca asked. Tom and Lisa exchanged glances. He went home, Tom said. Said he needed to get into dry clothes. I thanked him, obviously. Told him we owed him everything. Rebecca felt a strange disappointment. She wanted to thank him herself. Needed to, really. But more than that, she wanted to understand. Why had he jumped when no one else had? What made him different? Her parents arrived, and then Tom's parents, and the hospital room filled with people expressing relief and telling her how lucky she was, and rehashing what had happened from their perspectives. Tom's father kept saying what a hero Kevin was. Tom's mother was crying, saying she couldn't believe her baby boy had saved the day. Through all of it, Rebecca just kept thinking about those seconds in the water. The cold, the fear, the absolute certainty that she was in serious trouble. And then Kevin just suddenly there, calm and capable and exactly what she needed. They released her 4 hours later with instructions to rest and watch for any delayed symptoms of hypothermia or secondary drowning. Tom drove her home, his hand on her knee the whole way. He kept talking about how terrified he'd been, how he'd thought he was going to lose her, how grateful he was that Kevin had been there. At her apartment, Tom helped her inside and got her settled on the couch with blankets and tea. He was being attentive, sweet, everything a fiancé should be after his partner nearly drowned, but Rebecca couldn't stop seeing him frozen at that, railing. She couldn't stop contrasting that image, with Kevin hitting the water without a second's hesitation. Should have jumped, Tom said suddenly, as if reading her mind. He was sitting beside her on the couch, staring at his hands. I should have been the one to save you. I'm your fiancé. I'm supposed to protect you. You panicked, Rebecca said. It's a normal reaction. Kevin didn't panic. No, Kevin hadn't panicked. Tom stayed with her that night, sleeping beside her, but Rebecca barely slept at all. She kept replaying everything. Not just the moment she fell, but everything that came after. Tom's face at the railing. Lisa's screaming. Claire on her phone. All of them doing something, but none of them doing the one thing she actually needed. And Kevin. Kevin, who she barely knew. Kevin, who was always the quiet one at family gatherings. Kevin, who everyone overlooked. Kevin had been the only one who jumped. In the darkness of her bedroom, with Tom sleeping beside her, Rebecca started to wonder about something she'd never questioned before. She looked at her engagement ring, catching the faint light from the street lamp outside. She thought about her wedding in 4 months. She thought about Lisa being her maid of honor, about Claire giving a speech, about building a life with Tom. She thought about all the people she'd surrounded herself with, all the relationships she'd invested in, all the love she thought was solid and real, and she wondered if she fell again, who would actually jump. 3 days passed before Rebecca called Kevin. She told herself she was just being polite, that she needed to thank him properly, not through Tom's secondhand gratitude or a text message, but deep down she knew it was more than that. She needed to understand. They met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, away from family and the story that everyone couldn't stop telling. When Kevin walked in, Rebecca barely recognized him. Without the fancy boat party clothes or the soaking wet rescue gear, he looked different. Just a regular guy in jeans and a flannel shirt, with a slightly awkward wave as he approached her table. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair across from her. How are you feeling? Alive, Rebecca said, trying for humor but hearing how it fell flat. Thanks to you. Kevin shook his head. You would have been fine. The crew had it under control. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The crew had been scrambling. The boat had been turning. In those critical seconds, Kevin had been the difference between fine and not fine. Why did you jump? Rebecca asked. She hadn't meant to be so direct, but the question had been burning in her mind for 3 days. Kevin looked surprised, like it was the strangest question in the world. You were drowning. Tom was closer. Lisa was right there. The crew? I don't know why everyone else didn't jump, Kevin interrupted. I only know why I did. You needed help. I could help. It wasn't complicated. Rebecca stirred her coffee, watching the cream swirl. Tom keeps apologizing. He says he froze. Most people freeze, Kevin said. His voice was matter-of-fact, not judgmental. That's normal. Fear does that. Your brain just stops working for a second. Yours didn't. I've had training. 4 summers as a lifeguard teaches you to override that freeze response. You see someone in trouble, you go. You don't think about it because thinking wastes time. The barista called out an order. Someone laughed at another table. Normal coffee shop sounds. While Rebecca sat across from someone who'd literally saved her life and was treating it like no big deal. Tom's been different since it happened, Rebecca found herself saying. She hadn't meant to share that. But something about Kevin made her feel like she could be honest. Maybe it was because he'd already seen her at her most vulnerable. He's trying really hard. Too hard, maybe. Like he's trying to make up for not jumping. Kevin took a sip of his coffee. That's between you two. But it bothers you. It's not my place to. Kevin, you jumped into a river to save me. I think you've earned the right to an opinion. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tapping against his cup. Finally, he looked up at her. My brother's a good guy. You know that. He's charming and successful and everyone loves him. But he's never really had to be there for anyone. Not really. Everything's always come easy to him. Rebecca thought about that. It was true. Tom had glided through life. Good looks, good job, good family. He'd never faced any real crisis, never been tested in any meaningful way. And you have? She asked. Kevin smiled, but it was a sad smile. Being the overlooked kid teaches you to pay attention. You notice things other people miss. You learn to be useful in ways that don't require being the center of attention. Over the next hour, they talked. Really talked. Kevin told her about being the younger brother, always in Tom's shadow. About how their parents constantly compared them, how Tom was the golden child while Kevin was just kind of there. About how he'd learned to find value in being reliable rather than remarkable. Rebecca told him about her life, which suddenly felt hollow in the telling. The perfect job that was actually just okay. The friend group that looked great in photos but felt increasingly superficial. The wedding planning that had become more about the event than the marriage. Can I ask you something? Kevin said as their coffee cups emptied. And you can tell me it's none of my business. Go ahead. Are you actually happy? The question hit Rebecca like another plunge into cold water. Was she happy? She'd thought she was. She'd built this life brick by brick, checking off all the boxes society says you're supposed to check. Good job, good partner, good friends, good family. From the outside, it looked perfect. But Kevin had asked if she was actually happy, and she couldn't immediately say yes. I thought I was, she said finally, but I keep thinking about those seconds in the water. I was drowning, and all I could see was everyone watching, standing there watching but not actually helping. That's not fair, Kevin said gently. They didn't know what to do. But you did. I had training. It's not about the training. Rebecca's voice was rising slightly, and she forced herself to lower it. It's about the instinct. You saw someone in trouble and you went. Tom saw his fiancée in trouble and he froze. What does that say? Kevin didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew what it said. Rebecca went home that afternoon with her head full of thoughts she didn't want to think. Tom came over that evening with takeout from her favorite Thai place. He was still being extra attentive, extra loving. Like he could make up for those seconds of frozen panic with enough sweet gestures. Over dinner, he talked about the wedding. The venue had called about final numbers. His mother wanted to add 3 more people to the guest list. The photographer needed a deposit. All the normal wedding stuff that should have excited her. Are you listening? Tom asked. Rebecca realized she'd been staring at her pad thai without eating. Sorry, I'm just tired. You've been tired a lot lately. His voice had an edge to it. Ever since the boat, I almost drowned, Tom. I know. And I feel terrible about it. But it's been 3 days. The doctor said you're fine. Maybe it's time to move forward? Move forward. Like nearly dying was just a minor inconvenience in the wedding planning schedule. Did you see Kevin today? Tom asked suddenly. Rebecca looked up, caught off guard. I had coffee with him. To say thank you. Tom's jaw tightened. Right, thank you. For doing what I should have done. That's not, it is though. Tom pushed his food away. Everyone's been saying it. My own parents have been going on about how brave Kevin was, how heroic. Like I'm not even there. Like I didn't matter. Tom, you matter. Of course you matter. But you're making this about you when it's not. Not about me. My fiancée almost died and I couldn't save her. My little brother, the one everyone ignores, was the hero. How is that not about me? Rebecca stared at him. Really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw what had probably always been there, but she'd been too caught up in the perfect life narrative to notice. Tom cared more about how the situation made him look than about what she'd gone through. You should go, she said quietly. What? I need some space. To think, Tom stood up, his face flushed. Think about what? About how I'm not hero material? About how my brother is better than me? About whether this is what I want. The words hung in the air between them. Tom's face went from red to pale. The wedding? Everything. He left. Slammed the door on his way out, actually, which was unlike him. Tom was usually so controlled, so smooth. But the cracks were showing now. Rebecca sat alone in her apartment, the uneaten Thai food growing cold on her coffee table. She picked up her phone and scrolled through Instagram. There were photos from the boat party taken before she fell. Her and Tom looking perfect. Lisa's posed shot of the three of them. Claire's family photo. Everyone looked so happy, like they were all exactly where they were supposed to be. The next morning, Rebecca called in sick to work. She wasn't actually sick, but she wasn't okay either. She spent the day in her apartment trying to figure out what was wrong. On paper, nothing was wrong. She had a good life. Tom was a good guy who'd had a bad moment. So he'd frozen, so what? He'd been there for her in the aftermath. He'd stayed by her hospital bed. He'd been attentive and apologetic. That counted for something, didn't it? But she kept coming back to Kevin's question. Was she actually happy? Lisa called that afternoon. Tom called me, she said. He's really upset. Says you're having second thoughts about the wedding. I'm having second thoughts about everything. Because he didn't jump into the river? Rebecca, that's not fair. Not everyone is a trained lifeguard. It's not just about the river, then what is it about? Rebecca tried to explain. About how the incident had made her see things differently. About how she'd started noticing patterns she'd ignored before. About how her whole life felt like a performance sometimes, like she was playing a role instead of living authentically. Lisa listened, but Rebecca could hear the skepticism in her silence. Finally, Lisa said, "You're traumatized. What happened was scary, but you can't blow up your life because of one bad moment." After they hung up, Rebecca sat with that. Was Lisa right? Was she overreacting? Letting one incident color everything else? But it wasn't just one incident, she realized. The river had just made her see clearly for the first time. She thought about Lisa, her best friend of 15 years. How many times had Rebecca been there for Lisa? Every breakup, every job crisis, every family drama. But when Rebecca thought about it, really thought about it, when had Lisa been there for her? She talked a good game about friendship, posted emotional tributes on Rebecca's birthday, always said the right things. But when had she actually shown up in a meaningful way? She thought about Claire, her sister. Claire, who had everything together, who gave great advice, who was always available for a phone call. But Claire, who also always had an excuse when Rebecca really needed something, who'd never actually inconvenienced herself for Rebecca's sake. She thought about Tom, who was attentive and romantic and checked all the boyfriend boxes. But Tom, who'd never really been tested until the river, and when tested, he'd failed. No, that wasn't fair. He hadn't failed. He'd just been human, but Kevin had been human too, and he'd jumped. That night, Rebecca stood at her window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the Willamette River flowed quietly in the dark. 3 days ago, she'd fallen into that water and learned something she couldn't unlearn. She'd learned that the people she thought would be there for her weren't the ones who actually were, and now she had to figure out what to do with that knowledge. 2 weeks after the river incident, Rebecca's company announced layoffs. The email came at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, cold and corporate. Budget restructuring. Difficult decisions. They'd be meeting with affected employees throughout the week. Rebecca knew immediately she was on the list. Her department had been struggling for months, and as one of the mid-level employees without major accounts, she was expendable. Sure enough, her manager called her into a conference room that afternoon. "I'm so sorry," he said. And he did actually look sorry. "You've been a great asset to the team. We're offering 3 months severance and job placement assistance." Rebecca nodded through the whole speech, signed the papers, packed up her desk. It was all very civilized and professional and completely devastating. She'd worked there for 6 years. It wasn't her dream job, but it was stable. It paid well. It was part of the life she'd built. She called Tom from her car in the parking lot. He didn't answer. She tried again. Voicemail. She sent a text. "Got laid off, call me?" An hour passed, then 2. Finally, he called back. "Sorry, babe, I was in meetings." "Did you say you got laid off?" "Yeah, this morning." "Oh no. That's terrible. Are you okay?" They talked for maybe 5 minutes. Tom was sympathetic in that distant way people are when something bad happens to someone else. He said all the right things about how she'd find something better, how this was probably a blessing in disguise. how her talents were wasted there anyway. Then he said, "Listen, I hate to do this, but we might need to scale back the wedding plans. With just my income, we can't really afford the venue we picked." Rebecca sat in her car, phone pressed to her ear, trying to process that. She'd just lost her job, and Tom's first concern was the wedding budget. "We could postpone," she said. "Postpone? We've already put deposits down, and my parents have booked their flights. We can't just postpone." "Tom, I just lost my job. I know, and I'm sorry, but we still have bills to pay and a wedding to plan. Can we talk about this tonight? I really need to get back to work." They hung up. Rebecca sat in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, watching people come and go from the building she no longer worked in. Then she called Lisa. "Oh my God, that's awful," Lisa said. "Are you okay? Do you want to get drinks?" "Yeah, actually." "That would be great. Perfect. How about Thursday?" "I'm slammed today and tomorrow, but Thursday I'm free." "Thursday." 2 days away. Rebecca had just lost her job and her best friend was slammed. "Sure," Rebecca said. "Thursday works." She drove home in a daze. At a red light, she found herself texting Kevin. She hadn't talked to him since coffee 2 weeks ago, but somehow he felt like the person she wanted to tell. "Got laid off today," she wrote, then immediately felt stupid. Why was she texting her fiancé's brother about this? But her phone buzzed back almost immediately. "That's rough. Want company? I can bring pizza and terrible movies." Rebecca stared at the message. Tom was too busy. Lisa was slammed. But Kevin, who barely knew her, was offering to come over with pizza. "That would be nice," she typed back. He showed up an hour later with a large pepperoni pizza and 3 movies that were indeed terrible. "I stopped by the dollar store," he said, holding up the DVDs. "We're talking peak 90s action. Explosions, bad dialogue, the works." They ate pizza on her couch and watched movies where things blew up for no reason, and the hero always won. Kevin didn't try to give her advice or tell her it would all work out. He just sat there making fun of the terrible acting and making sure she ate. During the second movie, Rebecca said, "Tom wants to scale back the wedding, because I don't have income anymore." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" "I don't know." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I don't know anything anymore. 2 weeks ago, my life made sense. I had a job, a wedding planned, everything figured out. Now I don't know what I'm doing." "That's not a bad thing," Kevin said, "not knowing. It means you're actually thinking instead of just following the script." "What script?" "The one we all follow. Get the job, meet the person, plan the wedding, buy the house, have the kids. Check the boxes and call it a life." Rebecca looked at him. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I think you're realizing it's what you've been doing. And now you're wondering if you actually want any of it." He wasn't wrong. The river had started it, but the layoff had cracked something open even wider. She was 34 years old and suddenly had no idea what she wanted. "Tom and I are fighting," she admitted. "Not big fights. Just these little tensions that keep building up. He's frustrated that I'm not moving past the river thing. I'm frustrated that he doesn't understand why I can't just move past it." "Have you told him that?" "I've tried. But he doesn't want to hear it. He wants everything to go back to normal." Kevin reached for another slice of pizza. Maybe normal is the problem. Over the next few weeks, Kevin became Rebecca's unexpected anchor. He helped her update her resume, pointing out skills she'd downplayed. He connected her with someone in his network who was hiring. When she had a panic attack at 2 in the morning about money and the future, he answered her call and talked her down until she could breathe again. Tom noticed. "You've been spending a lot of time with Kevin. He's helping me job hunt. I could help you job hunt. You're busy with work. I'm your fiancé. I should be the one helping you." But he wasn't helping. He was just saying he should be helping, which wasn't the same thing at all. Rebecca started looking at her relationships with new eyes. Really looking, not just accepting them at face value. She started noticing things she'd ignored before, like how Lisa always had time for brunch and shopping, but was mysteriously busy when Rebecca needed help moving furniture or dealing with something difficult. How their friendship was built on fun times and surface level support but crumbled under any real weight, like how Claire gave great advice from her perfect life but had never actually walked through hard times with Rebecca. How she was full of "you should just" suggestions that ignored how complicated real life actually was, like how Tom was wonderful when things were going well but became distant and frustrated when Rebecca needed actual support. How he wanted the Instagram version of a relationship, but didn't know how to handle the messy reality. Rebecca got a job offer. It was a lateral move, similar pay, nothing exciting, but it was stable. Tom was thrilled. See? I told you it would work out. Now we can get back to planning the wedding. I don't want to plan the wedding, Rebecca said. They were at Tom's apartment. He'd made dinner, opened wine, trying to celebrate her job offer. But Rebecca felt hollow. What do you mean? We can afford it now. We don't have to scale back. I mean, I don't want to plan it at all. I need to postpone. Tom set down his wine glass. Because I didn't jump in the river. No, yes, I don't know. Rebecca pressed her palms to her eyes. The river made me see things, Tom, about us. About our relationship. And I can't unsee them. So what? I failed one test and now you want to throw away 3 years? It's not about passing or failing. It's about who we actually are when things get hard. And when things got hard, you weren't there. I've been here every day since it happened. You've been here physically. But you haven't actually been here. You've been apologizing and trying to make up for the river. But you haven't asked me once how I'm really doing. When I lost my job, your first thought was the wedding budget. When I was scared at 2 a.m, you didn't answer your phone. You called Kevin. Because Kevin answered. Tom stood up, pacing. So what, you want to marry Kevin instead? Is that what this is about? This isn't about Kevin. This is about you and me and the fact that I don't think we actually know how to be there for each other. They talked in circles for another hour. Tom arguing that they could fix things, that every relationship had rough patches, that she was making too big a deal out of everything. Rebecca trying to explain that it wasn't about fixing things. It was about whether the foundation was solid in the first place. Finally, she took off her engagement ring and set it on the table. I need time, she said. Real time. To figure out what I actually want. Tom stared at the ring. So this is it? We're over? I don't know. Maybe. I just know I can't keep planning a wedding when I'm not sure about the marriage. She left his apartment that night feeling both terrified and relieved. The life she'd built was falling apart piece by piece. Job gone. Engagement paused. Everything she'd thought was solid turning out to be sand. But Kevin had been right. Not knowing meant she was actually thinking. She started therapy. Her therapist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and zero patience for bullshit, asked her point blank in their first session. What do you want? I don't know, Rebecca said. Then let's figure it out. They talked about patterns. About how Rebecca had spent her life building what she thought she was supposed to want, instead of figuring out what she actually wanted. About how she'd surrounded herself with people who looked good on paper but didn't show up in reality. The river didn't change you, her therapist said. It just made you see clearly. Rebecca started making changes. Small ones at first. She stopped saying yes to things she didn't actually want to do. She stopped pretending to be fine when she wasn't. She started paying attention to who actually showed up versus who just said they would. Lisa was hurt when Rebecca declined yet another brunch invitation. You're being really distant lately. I'm being honest, Rebecca said. I don't want to do brunch. I want to have a real conversation about what's going on in my life. We talk about real things, do we? When's the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about surface stuff? When's the last time you asked me how I was really doing? Lisa couldn't answer that. They didn't stop being friends, but the friendship shifted. Became less frequent, less central. It hurt, but it was also honest. Claire was confused when Rebecca stopped asking for advice. I'm just trying to help. I know, but I need to figure things out myself. I need to make mistakes and learn from them instead of following someone else's instructions. Through it all, Kevin was just there. Not pushing, not advising, just available. They fell into an easy pattern of meeting for coffee every week, sometimes more. He treated her like a person, not a project or a problem to solve. You're different, he said one day at their usual coffee shop. Different how? More real. Like you're actually living your life instead of performing it. Rebecca thought about that. It was true. She was messier now, less put together, but she was also more honest, more herself, whoever that turned out to be. Tom asks about you, Kevin said carefully. He wants to know if we're seeing each other. Are we? Rebecca asked. Kevin smiled. I don't know, are we? They looked at each other across the table. Something hung in the air between them, unspoken but present. I don't think I'm ready, Rebecca said, for anything like that. I'm still figuring out who I am. That's fair, Kevin said. "I'm not going anywhere." And he didn't. He stayed exactly where he was, a constant in her increasingly fluid life, letting her figure things out at her own pace. 6 months after falling into the river, Rebecca stood at the edge of a swimming pool. Not the river, not yet, but a pool at the community center where Kevin had convinced her to take a swim class. "I can't believe I'm doing this," she said, staring at the water. Kevin stood beside her in swim trunks and a t-shirt, serving as her moral support. "You don't have to, but you said you wanted to." She had said that. In therapy, she'd talked about how the river had made her afraid of water. Her therapist had asked what she wanted to do about it. Rebecca had surprised herself by saying she wanted to learn to swim properly, to take back the power the river had taken from her. So here she was, 34 years old, in a beginner swim class with a bunch of teenagers and elderly people, about to get in a pool for the first time since the incident. The instructor, a patient woman named Beth, called them into the shallow end. Rebecca took a breath and walked down the steps. The water was warm, nothing like the shock of the river. She stood there waist-deep, feeling her heart race. "You okay?" Kevin called from the edge. She gave him a thumbs up. She wasn't okay, not really, but she was doing it. That counted for something. The class was basic. Floating, breathing, simple strokes, things little kids learned. But for Rebecca, every moment in the water was a victory over fear. By the end of the hour, she'd managed to float on her back without panicking. Small wins. Kevin took her for coffee afterward, their regular post-swim routine. Over the past 6 months, these coffee meetups had become the most consistent thing in her life. Everything else had shifted and changed, but Kevin was always there, steady and present. "Tom's dating someone," Rebecca said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Claire told me. Some woman from his gym. How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, actually. I felt guilty, like I'd left him hanging. But if he's moving on, then I didn't break him or anything. You know that's not how people work, right? You can't break someone by being honest about what you need." Rebecca had learned that lesson over and over in therapy, but it was still taking time to actually believe it. She and Tom had officially called off the engagement 2 months ago. It had been sad but not devastating, which told her everything she needed to know about whether she should have married him. They'd been civil about it, split up their combined possessions, agreed to stay out of each other's lives. Tom had been bitter at first, especially about Kevin. "Of course you're choosing my brother," he'd said. But Rebecca wasn't choosing Kevin, not like that. She was choosing herself, and Kevin just happened to be someone who understood that. Her job was going well. Not exciting, but stable. She'd made a few friends there. Real ones who actually showed up when she needed something. She'd learned to tell the difference between people who performed friendship and people who lived it. Lisa had drifted away almost completely. They exchanged occasional texts, but the deep friendship they'd once had was gone. It hurt, but Rebecca understood now that it had been built on convenience and proximity, not on actual substance. Claire was still her sister, still in her life, but Rebecca had stopped looking to her for validation or guidance. They had dinner once a month and talked about surface things, and that was okay. Not every relationship had to be deep to be valuable. Her parents had been confused by all the changes. "You had such a nice life," her mother kept saying. "Tom was such a good man." "He was," Rebecca agreed. "But he wasn't the right man for me." "And Kevin is?" "I don't know what Kevin is," Rebecca said honestly. "Right now he's my friend." That's enough. But if she was being really honest, it was becoming more than friendship, not in any dramatic sweep-you-off-your-feet way, just in small moments that kept accumulating. The way Kevin always remembered her coffee order, how he noticed when she was having a bad day before she even said anything, the comfortable silences that didn't need filling. "I'm scared," Rebecca told her therapist, "of getting involved with Kevin. What if I'm just attracted to him because he saved me? What if I'm making another mistake? What does your gut tell you?" Rebecca's gut told her that Kevin was different, that what they had was built on honesty and mutual respect, on actually showing up for each other, but her gut had been wrong before. "Give yourself time," her therapist said. "There's no rush." So Rebecca gave herself time. She kept swimming, getting stronger in the water. She built a life that felt more authentic, even if it looked less impressive from the outside. She learned to sit with not knowing, with uncertainty, with the messy reality of being human. One day, 3 months after she'd started swim class, Kevin suggested they go to the river. "Are you serious?" Rebecca asked. "You've conquered the pool." Maybe it's time to face the actual river. Her first instinct was to say no, but she'd learned that her first instinct was usually fear talking, and fear didn't get to run her life anymore. They went on a Saturday morning, just the two of them. The river looked different in daylight, calm and beautiful instead of dark and terrifying. They found a spot along the bank away from boats and crowds. "I fell in right over there," Rebecca said, pointing to a spot where the bridge crossed the water. "It feels like a different lifetime." "In a way it was," Kevin said. "You're a different person now than you were then." He was right. The woman who'd fallen into the river 6 months ago had been sleepwalking through life, following a script, surrounding herself with people who looked good but didn't show up. "That woman was gone, thank you," Rebecca said, "for jumping in. Not just in the river, but in everything since." "For being there," Kevin smiled. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere." They sat by the river for a long time watching the water flow past. Rebecca thought about how water keeps moving, keeps changing, never stays still. Maybe people were like that too. Maybe she'd spent her whole life trying to be still, to be solid and predictable and safe, when what she really needed was to keep flowing, keep changing, keep growing. "I think I'm ready," she said. "For what?" "To see where this goes. You and me." "If you want to." Kevin turned to look at her. "I've wanted to for months, but I didn't want to push." "You needed time." "I did. I still do, probably. But I also know what it feels like when someone actually shows up for you, and you always have." They didn't kiss by the river or have some dramatic movie moment. They just sat together, shoulders touching, watching the water flow by. It felt right in a way Rebecca's engagement to Tom never had. Quiet and real and based on something solid. Over the next few months, they took things slow, dating but not rushing, learning each other without the pressure of wedding planning or future commitments, just being together and seeing what developed naturally. Rebecca kept swimming. By the time a year had passed since her fall, she was strong enough to swim in the river itself with Kevin beside her as a precaution. The water was still cold, still intimidating, but she was no longer afraid of it. One evening, as they sat on her couch watching one of their terrible action movies, Kevin said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" "Tom thinks you chose me over him." "But that's not really what happened, is it?" Rebecca thought about that. "No, I chose myself. You just happened to be someone who supported that choice." "That's what I thought." They went back to watching the movie, but Rebecca kept thinking about it. She'd spent so much of her life trying to be chosen, trying to be good enough for other people. The right employee, the right friend, the right fiancé, performing a version of herself that would make people want to keep her around. But falling into the river had taught her something crucial. In a crisis, when everything falls away, what matters isn't who you've been performing for. What matters is who actually jumps in. And more importantly, she'd learned that she needed to be someone who would jump in for herself. She couldn't rely on other people to save her. She had to be willing to save herself. Kevin had been the one who jumped in that day on the river, but every day since, Rebecca had been jumping in after herself, choosing authenticity over performance, choosing real relationships over convenient ones, choosing to build a life that actually fit who she was instead of who she thought she should be.